Hello, I'm glad you could make it. This PowerPoint covers CII, which is commercial, industrial, and institutional users. So let's get started. So water connections or water accounts are divided into two groups. They're either residential or CII. And we're going to cover CII right now. They're the more difficult customers that you'll ever have to make water conservation a way of life for. Mostly because they're so diverse, it's really difficult to get a handle on what programs or projects will work for them. If you can, the savings potential is very high. For example, in my district, we have 32,000 accounts. 30,000 of them basically are residential, but they only use 74% of the water. The other 2,000 are CII customers, but they use 26% of the water. So the potential is much higher for me to save water with CII customers. But the problem is they are so different or so unique that it's hard for me to be able to find a program or project that works for all of them or even one segment. Their water use often fluctuates. Residential customers follow a seasonal trend, mostly due to outdoor irrigation. But CII customers do not. They fluctuate due to economic conditions, production changes, can be weather, and then occupancy. So that makes it even more difficult or challenging to try and figure out. So what are these customers? Well, they're commercial customers. So they're business customers like hotels, restaurant buildings, strip malls, office buildings, nail salons, hair salons, service industry places. They all fall under commercial. Industrial are manufacturers, and they're defined by industrial classification codes. So we don't really deal with those a whole lot, but it is important for you to know that that is how they are defined. We have, in my district, we actually have Del Real Foods. They are a huge maker of ready-to-eat Mexican foods. They're a great example of a manufacturer that's non-traditional. They use phenomenal amounts of water in their processes. So, but honestly, they do a really good job of managing their water considering. And then you have institutional customers. And institutional customers are typically prisons and schools. I don't happen to have any prisons in my area. If you have a prison in your area, tread very lightly about what you can do. They need special things that you might not be able to manage, like special toilets, special sinks. Same is true with hospitals. There are laws that govern how much water can be used, so you can't save a lot of water in a hospital generally, except maybe in outdoor irrigation. And schools have their own special problems too. They're very similar to prisons in that they have to have industrial grade toilets, industrial grade sinks. There's quite a bit of vandalism that goes along with schools, and that makes them a little bit more difficult to manage as well. So here's some more of the commercial users that you might see. Laundries are a good opportunity. You can put in high efficiency washing machines that are commercial grade. Car washes are a good example where you might be able to save some water. Health clubs, just changing shower heads out in health clubs can be a tremendous water savings. Restaurants can switch to commercial grade low water using dishwashers. That can be a big way to save. But you can see that this group is so diverse that you really can't make one program that would fit all of them. With the exception of landscapes. Almost all of these users will have some sort of landscaping. Now, in the department store area, it's a little bit more difficult. That's usually the mall or wherever it's usually owned by a developer, but they all have landscaping. So that might be an option that would go across all of them, all of these different classifications. But besides that, there are very few things that go across all of them. You almost have to select one and say, okay, in my area, there's 6 laundries. I'm going to see what I can do to save water for these 6 laundries. Or there's 1,000 restaurants. I'm going to target these restaurants. or 10 health clubs. I'm going to target them. You almost cannot take them as one single group. Now, industrial users are a little bit different. They have water that they primarily use for cooling and heating. And it could be cooling and heating, but not for people. And by that, I mean a lot of industrial users have computer banks, and they do spend a lot of energy and water just cooling computer systems. They do that by way of processed water, usually up on the roof, cooling towers. They also may use a lot of water for washing and sanitation. So you can't really save a lot of water in sanitation uses. Maybe you could do some in the restrooms. Processed water, again, I'm going to use my example of for Del Real Foods. They do a very good job of saving water, but they can't reuse water. They cut up their own meat, they cut up their own vegetables, they wash all their own stuff, they do their own cooking there. There's really no way to save water within their processes. We also have MCC, which is a container division for Anheuser-Busch. And they make all sorts of beer cans and soda cans at this one location. Well, they already have their processed water down just incredibly. They know exactly how much water they use for every single thing. But it's still worth it to take a look at it. Construction is a place where you can save water quite a bit. And the reason is because they're traditionally really water wasters, but it's going to require a high degree of follow-up. So you can mandate that they don't power wash things, for example, which is a terrible waste of water. But if you don't follow it up constantly, they're going to sneak and do it anyway. So these are just items that you need to be aware of in industrial use, in the last one. Now, industrial users can also be electronics, beverages I mentioned, petroleum, paper mills, textiles. All of these are extremely high water using processes. So you can offer them help where you can. Sometimes with industrial users, as with any CII user, it's a little difficult to get to the decision maker. So you may have to hunt around a little bit for the person who can actually help them save water. But it's well worth the hunt if you're willing to put in the time. And then there's institutional users. And I talked about these a little bit already. Most institutions on this list, like hospitals and nursing homes, they already have laws that govern how much cleanliness they need to have. That makes total sense, right? And for things to be clean, you need water. So you're not going to be able to do too much at a hospital or a nursing home, unless they have large landscape areas and you convert them from sod to some other water-saving landscape. Churches and synagogues, though, are often a good opportunity for water savings because a lot of times they have very old appliances, old toilets. They usually have very large landscapes. And you might find that that's a really good place to start. They're always looking to save money. And if you can help them financially by offsetting their costs, they'll be very happy to talk to you. Schools are a whole different animal, just like universities, colleges, and I didn't put prisons on here, but I should have. They need special equipment, but again, schools are always looking for ways to save money. So it's usually worthwhile to try and talk to somebody in the district office to see if you can at least do an audit and see if there's ways you can actually help them save water. So it's, Clint Eastwood, he's the best. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly. For some of you who are older, you'll know what that reference is. The good part of it is that there's just a huge potential to save water in there. If you can find an industry or select an industry that is all the same, like you're going to target restaurants, you're going to target schools, you're going to target hospitals. Don't try to do it across sector. And there can be some reduced costs for the people you're trying to help. Now, you kind of have to be a little bit careful because ratepayers don't like you giving money to businesses. So you have to flesh that out very carefully because they're for profit. So a ratepayer, a regular residential ratepayer, and perhaps your board or council is going to say that they should be subsidizing their own. You can always get around that by saying, hey, we got to meet our water conservation targets, but you do have to be careful of this. The bad is that they have different priorities than you. They're not necessarily interested in saving water. Putting in a brand new cooling system just to save $100 worth of water when they laid out $15,000, it's not cost efficient for them. They're not going to be interested. Their priorities are very different. Implementation can be very, very slow on these projects. I checked into cooling towers not too long ago, and the only people who have cooling towers in my district are grocery stores. And trying to get to the head chief decision maker in a grocery store chain is super difficult. Turns out they were actually pretty interested in changing their cooling towers and saving some money that way, but it's going to take at least a year. And there may be some resistance. In the private sector, people are often so busy that they just don't even have time to talk to you about anything. The ugly part of it is it's really hard to reach the decision maker and the technicalities of it all. I've been in the business 19 years now. I still am not proficient at cooling towers, is my best example. So about a year ago, I decided I was going to hire a consultant who was good at cooling towers. And guess what? I couldn't find one. People would tell me they were good at it, but then when I actually asked them questions because I wanted the answers, they didn't know at all. So the reality is, if I'm going to do more cooling tower work, I've got to learn about cooling towers. And that is the way it is across CII. A lot of it is very technical. And the installation costs are really large. In the laundromat example, it's not too bad to replace a high efficiency clothes washer. But in most other applications, it's very, very expensive. This is part of the reason why you never find CII to be extremely popular. We concentrate on residential customers instead. So there's different approaches to this. There's hardware. I always start at hardware when it's possible. If I can give you a widget to replace, I can offset the cost maybe through a rebate. And then you're going to save water and money instantly. You're going to be much happier. You're going to have to find the operations system manager. How is their system actually set up? That can be a little bit time consuming. And in my experience, managerial changes have really made a tremendous difference. You know, you're working with one manager, that manager's really on board. It's a priority for them. Maybe it's a personal issue. They really believe in climate change. They really want to save the environment. They're very interested. And then boom, they're gone. They've left to another store. They've left for another company. And you're kind of starting over again. Regulatory measures are very, very helpful in getting these things done. If you can go to them and say, look, there was a regulatory change. In our case, there's water conservation measures coming up, and we need you to get on board because we need your help, or your company personally is going to be fined. That makes a big difference. So you want to take advantage of any regulatory measure that you can find. So here's maybe how you would set that program up. You're going to identify by category. As I said, you're going to say, yeah, I'm going to work on restaurants. Yeah, I'm going to work on gas stations. You're going to decide a category you want to attack, and then you're going to try to provide audits to these people. You're not necessarily going to do the audit yourself. You can hire an outside auditor, but with CII, it's a lot more complex. Sometimes you're going to end up doing it yourself for that reason. You're going to take your audit back and you're going to kind of estimate what you think they could save and do an analysis. And no business is going to buy in without a financial incentive. So if you have rebate money tucked aside, that's the place to do it. You want to see if you can get some rebates for these commercial customers. You can provide workshops for them and guidebooks. I've tried this a couple of times and been fairly successful with it. But you really have to keep at it. They're very busy people too. Recognitions and awards are part of the self-norming trend. And if you can provide recognition to a customer, a commercial customer who's doing it right, who's maybe gone just a little bit extra because they really want to do the right thing, and then highlight that award, maybe bring them to a board meeting and give them some kudos for that. That may be your strongest way to get that done. That's just reinforcing a conservation message. If it's possible to adopt ordinance within your area that's maybe targeted toward businesses, that would help you be very successful. It's very difficult to do. So an example of that ordinance might be every time an apartment is rented out, all the devices have to be changed to water saving devices. Like the toilets have to be changed, the faucets have to be changed, everything has to go to a water saving device. That is difficult to get through. City councils in particular don't want to upset their businesses, but it can be done, but you're really going to have to work hard to get that through. I have had some success in commercial entities with direct installation. And what that means is I buy a bunch of toilets, or I hire a contractor. I contact apartment complexes, for example. And I tell them, I'm going to give these toilets to you for $20 a pop installed. If they have old toilets, they'll jump on it. And then you do them all at once through your vendor. Obviously, you're not going to do the work yourself. You can do that with apartment complexes. You can do that with some industrial uses. Any direct installation for a business is always going to work better. We did it with urinals too, and that worked extremely well for businesses. Now, it's not a huge water savings, but it did work really well. So what are the advances been? Now, mind you, I want to show you at the top. In California, we call it CII. In other places, you may hear it called ICI. It still means the same thing. They just rearranged the alphabet there. So advances recently have been the Clean Water Act. That made a big difference in what can be dumped in water. The pollution prevention laws and programs have really helped. You can't just throw fertilizer around. There are certain things that are now illegal to use. Energy conservation programs. Sometimes you can team up with an energy conservation program provider, and they will do water conservation measures with you for a cost well worth the money. There's national standards, which we've talked about a little bit for energy and water. Water towers have come a long way. Water cooling towers have come so far recently. I'd say within the last 10 years, they use a lot less water. Increased water and sewer has been very beneficial. Droughts and long-term water shortages have made businesses really take a look at how they're using any natural resource, especially water. Green business practices. 20 years ago, this wasn't on anybody's radar. But now most businesses want to at least appear to be somewhat environmentally friendly, if not really environmentally friendly. And alternative water resources. Remember I mentioned MCC, the beverage can maker? Well, on their own, they opted to replace all of their landscape. They had 250,000 square feet of green grass that they replaced with a beautiful native plant garden. They built in walking paths for their employees, and then they watered it with an alternative water resource, recycled water. This makes a big difference. If you can hook up any of your large water users to recycled water, it's the best bang. It's cheaper for them, and it frees up that much more potable water for uses that can only be potable water, not recycled water. This is an example of a cooling tower, and cooling towers work by running water down the sides and then generating cool air. It used to be that every time the water ran down the sides, that water was sent to the sewer, and then they got new water for it. So it was a constant refresh of new water. But new water cooling towers, they can usually reuse that water 3 to 4 times, depending on the natural mineral content, before they get rid of it, before they flush it out. So that's been a big change. Cooling towers are expensive to replace, though. So that's something to think about as well. Anyway, that ends our lecture on CII. And please feel free to email me at my email address with any questions you might have.